Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this fascinating breakdown of what truly limits our cognitive growth. We so often think of intelligence as this fixed number, right? Like a score on a test or a stack of fancy diplomas hanging on a wall. But the psychology of intelligence, and honestly, more importantly, the psychology of stagnant intelligence, reveals something completely different. Today, we're going to unpack the hidden, low-level cognitive habits that are secretly holding us back, and we'll look at the brutal signs that signal a mind has just stopped growing. So, what actually makes someone stupid? I mean, it's a pretty heavy question, but let's just immediately dismantle a massive myth right out of the gate. Psychology shows us that a lack of intelligence is rarely, actually scratch that, it's almost never about your formal education level. It's definitely not about having access to unlimited information, and it absolutely isn't about the size of your vocabulary. You can literally have multiple degrees on encyclopedic memory and still operate with daily mental habits that completely bottleneck your growth. The biggest indicator of low intelligence isn't a lack of knowledge at all, it's actually the deeply held, stubborn belief of your own that you're already smart enough. Stupid isn't an insult, it's a pattern of rigid certainty. Let that sink in for a second. When we use that word in a psychological context, we aren't just throwing around some playground insult. We're describing a very specific, observable pattern of behavior. True cognitive stagnation comes from a blatant refusal to adapt, and just a profound lack of curiosity. If you really want to move beyond average thinking, the absolute first prerequisite is having the guts to look in the mirror and admit, hey, I might be entirely wrong.
Which brings us to sign number 1, the trap of absolute certainty.
I am sure you've encountered this before. Someone speaking on highly complex, deeply nuanced topics with total, unshakable confidence, even when it becomes painfully obvious to everyone else that they barely understand the subject matter. A stagnant mind rarely experiences self-doubt. Well, they replace the hard work of actual comprehension with this thick armor of absolute certainty. This is the famously documented Dunning-Kruger Effect. The whole concept was actually inspired by a bank robber who covered his face in lemon juice, genuinely believing it would make him invisible to security cameras. Why? Because lemon juice is used as invisible ink. I know, it sounds like a joke, right? But it highlights this incredibly profound psychological trap. People with limited understanding overestimate their skills precisely because they don't know enough to realize what they're missing. They literally lack the foundational knowledge required to even perceive their own ignorance. Now here is the real paradigm shift. Real intelligence requires self-doubt as an active, everyday tool, while low competence demands extreme certainty as a shield. Intelligent minds are always actively stress testing their own conclusions. They're actively hunting for holes in their logic. On the flip side, rigid minds just assume they're always right by default. That total lack of awareness regarding their own blind spots, that becomes their defining feature. Moving right along, let's look at signs 2 and 3, when ego replaces logical debate. So what happens when the world pushes back against that absolute certainty? Well, the response is rarely logical. It becomes entirely emotional. This is what psychology calls cognitive rigidity. It's the absolute inability to think flexibly or adapt your beliefs when reality shifts, or when strong, undeniable new evidence is put right in front of you. To a rigid thinker, new data simply doesn't matter. Instead of updating their mental models to align with reality, they viewed changing their opinion as a fatal sign of weakness. They treat new evidence like a direct attack on their ego, effectively building a brick wall that completely blocks their own intellectual growth. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. A major hallmark of stagnant intelligence is the inability to separate ideas from identity. Logical thinkers get that an attack on their idea is not an attack on their soul, right? They actually welcome healthy debate because it sharpens their reasoning. But emotionally driven rigid thinkers, they completely confuse logical disagreement with personal disrespect. They just lack the emotional control to handle correction. Because healthy debating requires real cognitive effort that they simply cannot or will not exert, they react impulsively, they get super easily offended, and they become genuinely angry when presented with opposing opinions. To them, a simple factual correction feels like a literal slap in the face. Okay, that leads us right into signs 4 and 5, the danger of shallow processing. These final signs focus on what happens when individuals completely lose their sense of wonder and curiosity, leading them to dangerously oversimplify the very complex world around them. And it's a trap that is incredibly easy to fall into if we aren't paying attention. Sign number 4 is the "I already know" attitude. This is, without a doubt, one of the fastest ways to lose the respect of your peers and abruptly hit the brakes on your own development. Acting like you have absolutely nothing left to learn shuts down the true driving engine of intelligence, which is curiosity. When you declare that you already have all the answers, you permanently close the door on discovery. Let's look under the hood at the mechanics of that stagnation in action. Growing minds naturally question sources. They look into motives, and they are constantly asking why and how. They want to see the gears turning beneath the surface. Stuck minds, however, accept claims completely at face value. And this is key. They do this especially if that information confirms what they already believe. When you stop asking why, your knowledge remains entirely shallow, and your mind just stays permanently stuck in neutral. Which leads directly to sign number 5, oversimplifying complex issues. Reality is wonderfully messy and complex. The real world is almost never black and white. But stagnant thinking seeks to reduce everything into easily digestible, simple slogans or absolute answers. These individuals constantly use phrases like, "it's just common sense," or, "well, it's obvious," as a sort of defensive shield. By doing this, they successfully avoid engaging with the deep nuance and the heavy cognitive lifting actually required to understand reality. Psychology refers to this as shallow processing. It's this really tragic state where the world essentially shrinks. It becomes smaller not because the world itself changed, but because the thinking applied to it is simply too small to handle its inherent complexity. And this matters to all of us. Falling into this specific cognitive trap prevents us from grasping the true depth of real-world issues, leaving us making decisions based on catchy slogans rather than actual facts. Let's bring it all together here. Protect potential, not your ego. As we bring this explainer toward its conclusion, we really have to look at the ultimate choice every single one of us faces on a daily basis. True intelligence, at its core, isn't about posturing. It's not about trying to appear smart to the people around you. It's about the visibility of your integrity and your ongoing willingness to adapt to the truth, whatever that truth may be. Real smart people fiercely protect accuracy. Fake smart people fiercely protect their image. But hey, the fantastic news here is that our thinking patterns are not permanently hardwired. They can absolutely change. But that transformation only happens if you're willing to look at your own beliefs and say, you know what, I might be wrong. And that requires a level of vulnerability that a rigid, stagnant mind will rarely ever allow. So let's do a really quick recap of these 5 low-level cognitive habits. You can use this as a personal self-reflection checklist. Ask yourself if you ever catch yourself displaying extreme certainty on complex topics, rigid thinking when faced with new evidence, confusing simple disagreement with personal disrespect, holding an "I already know" attitude, or oversimplifying deeply complex issues. Identifying these habits in ourselves is literally step 1 toward breaking them and finally unbottlenecking our intellectual growth. So I want to leave you with this final lingering thought to carry with you today. Every single time you face a new piece of information that challenges your worldview, you have a choice to make. Are you protecting your ego, or are you protecting your potential? Rewiring your brain for the truth requires letting go of the need to always be right. It's not easy, for sure, but it is absolutely the only way forward.